topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If you don't know me and we haven't met before, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto Now help companies enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers activated by meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? In other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, alisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have back with us, this is our second time, Tamra Ryan, a nationally recognized speaker, author, and leadership expert who is redefining what it means to lead with purpose and compassion. She served as CEO of Women's Bean Project from 2003 to 2025. It's a social enterprise transforming lives through transitional employment, and she now dedicates herself to empowering others to become leaders worth following. She's the author of 2 books, one of which we'll be talking about today, Followership, 16 Lessons to Become a Leader Worth Following. She joins us today from Denver. Tamra, welcome back to Working on Purpose.
It's great to see you.
It is indeed. Now, look at this beautiful thing that you put out into the world. It's just gorgeous. And I really, as I told you in our exchanges, align with everything that you said in that book. And so much of it is really what I have been trying to teach leaders too in my practice. So I'm excited to get into this conversation with you. But let's first open for our listeners and viewers who don't know you the way that I do. Share a bit about where this book came from and some of the things you're drawing from your previous experience.
Well, it was, I think any book is sort of a labor of love.
Definitely. Most definitely.
You definitely don't write a book because it's easy to do. And as I led an organization, a mission-based organization for 22 years, I know that I changed and I became, I believe, a better person and a better leader. And while I was learning the things that I think made me those things, I watched as so many people were either disappointed by the leaders they were working with. As a society, we can see in the news all the time poor models of leadership. And then there were also some models where I'd look at people's success and say, okay, what allowed them to become so visionary and to change a culture or to change an industry? And so I really began thinking about, as I interacted with the people I worked with, what really inspired them to want to be there with me, and what conversely sort of turned them off. And so I really felt like there was an opportunity to write about the things that I learned during my experience as CEO of Women's Bean Project in a way that might save a lot of other people time, because I think the challenge of leadership is that you don't go into the job thinking, knowing exactly how to do it. Your first leadership role. And I can't tell you how many people. Just this week, I was in a CEO group, and to a person, everyone around the room talked about the amount of time it took them and this was in years before they actually really became the CEO.
Mm.
And what they meant by that was I had to grow into the role of learning how to lead. And I didn't know how to do it at the beginning. And yet, none of us are going to say that when we first are hired because you've just been hired to lead. So the motivation of the book really was to say, here's an opportunity to save you some time and really get to what I think people are looking for today in their leaders.
Mm. You definitely make a really strong case for this lack of trust that people have in their leaders, and that you make a case for doing leadership differently. And this is what I really want to embrace. You say it's time to turn the focus away from what leaders want to give and toward what followers are seeking from their leaders, what entices people and enlists them to join the leader in accomplishing great things. I call this new way of leading fellowship.
Mhm. And I think that the reason I call it fellowship is that instead of thinking about how do I lead, it is looking at it, what inspires somebody to want to be there with me. I often joke that if you're a leader and you turn around and look behind you and no one's there, you're actually not leading. And I think too often you almost maybe by definition, leadership is a very singular role. When you're leading a company, it's very lonely, and often we as a society put the leader on the pedestal, especially very public-facing leadership roles. And as a result, I think that the risk is leaders begin to think it's about them.
Yeah.
And what I often said, leading a very prominent social enterprise, that people made the decision whether or not to support our organization based on meeting me. But the moment I began to think it was about me, we were all in trouble. It was never about me. It was a role that I had and a responsibility I had to inspire people to want to join us on our quest to change the world. And the same thing goes for the people who are working with you. Your job as the leader is to inspire people to want to be with you, to accomplish great things, and to accomplish the mission and the purpose of the organization. And I think this is true whether or not you're leading a mission-based organization or a for-profit organization.
I completely agree. A couple of things I really want to call. There's so many specific things about your work and your book that I really want to position for our listeners and viewers. So first, I want to situate, and listeners and viewers, listen to this carefully. If you're a leader, I really want you to listen to this and hear this. You say in your book, Tamra, many leaders are caught in the gap between where they currently sit because of their training, background, and role models, and where their followers expect them to be. And that's back on thinking that it's about them. But I think it's important to call out that they are stuck in that gap, and if as soon as they realize that they are stuck in the gap, they can do something about that.
Yes, and I think that everything around them is reinforcing where they're stuck, and not giving them a path, or even insisting they find a path to be different. So I think you think about our society and how we view leaders and how we treat leaders, and how we have, in some instances, sort of this hero worship of leaders, and yet we're very, at the same time, often very turned off by that, by when someone behaves as though they deserve it. And so we're not giving anyone the opportunity to see the path to, maybe it's a more enlightened leadership of recognizing it's not about them. And that's, I think, why we're stuck, is because we put leaders on a pedestal and then we resent them for being on that pedestal.
Yes, and the other thing that I'm so present to, and I've written about it a little bit in my last book, The Great Revitalization, but you speak to it quite eloquently in your book. You say that leaders are learning that the hard way, that the relationship between them and their follower has been democratized. Followers now understand their power to choose whether or not to stay with the leader. And I think that's really important. I think for a lot of leaders, especially some of these really, really high level CEOs of large companies, I think this is really, really devastating for them.
I think that is true. It's devastating for them, or they blame it on the generational difference.
Oh, definitely. No
So
question.
I've been in so many conversations where, uh, the CEO will lament, uh, kids these days kind of conversation where like, what's going on with this next generation that's coming up? And what I think is that's a representation of this gap, is that,
Yes.
you know, I do think I came up in my career at a time where, you showed up, you just did what the leader said, you didn't question it, and it was maybe a lot more fear-based,
Yes.
development as a professional. And now we have leaders who came up during that time, who are looking to their younger employees and saying, I don't understand why you think you should have a voice here.
Right.
And so, and the difference, I think, when I talk about fellowship, is recognizing they do have a voice, because if you want them to come with you, you need to hear what they have to say. And gosh, they might actually have something great to say, but that you as a collective will be much more powerful together. That this isn't about how strong you are as a leader, as a sole leader. This is about your ability to um, again, uh, inspire people to want to be there with you. And I think I talk about this in the book also. That doesn't mean that you aren't ultimately the decision maker. It means that you are providing a platform for people to have voice, and ultimately knowing that you're making a decision. And so I talk about how to communicate those decisions, how to communicate to the followers, uh, what the process is going to be, how to understand why people have resistance, um, because people don't like change, and usually leaders like change because they're the ones leading the change.
Mhm.
Generally, people don't like change because it's being done to them.
Right.
So I talk about those kinds of things. In the past, I think you just, as a leader, you implemented change and you sort of said, suck it up and come with me, or don't. And I'm really trying to make the case that we will be better together.
Yes. Completely agree. A couple things that came up from that, Tamra. First, I attended a dinner a few weeks ago, and there was a gentleman there who had mentioned, he offered that he was 76 and had worked all over the world. And he was talking about today's workforce. And he said these new younger people need to learn how to just be quiet. And I said, excuse me, sir, with all due respect, I completely disagree with you. And we went into a conversation about that, and it was just, so it's kind of along the lines of what we're talking about here. And then last night I attended a conscious capitalism event here in Dallas, and we got into a conversation about, the speaker was saying that I am a voice for the voiceless. And someone else got up into the crowd and said, I must be controversial and tell you that I used to say that same thing. And she said, now I recognize everyone has a voice. It's just that they haven't been able to use it so frequently. And now I'm about enabling more people to use that voice, not to speak on behalf of others for their voice. And so I think you've really hit on something important here. I think that this exasperation is an expression of not understanding that we are a bigger, fuller workforce of multiple voices and generations. And yes, we are better together. So I think you've really articulated that really well.
Well, thanks. And I think also what has been lost is that you can enlist people to come with you if they understand where they're going and they buy into the vision.
Yeah.
And so there is a whole section about this idea that your responsibility as a leader is to create a vision that those who are around you contribute to, but to create a vision of where you're going and how much better the world is going to be when you accomplish that vision, and then enlist people to come with you. And I think too often what happens is the leader does not give a lot of thought to that vision, and potentially that there is no vision. It's just about shareholder value, and so everybody's marching forward, or the leader is hoping everyone marches forward to creating this shareholder value that potentially nobody but the leader has any interest in helping to create. And I think that that's also what gets lost, is that this isn't about a bunch of automatons who are going to follow this leader. It's about people being bought into where you're headed.
Yeah, no question, no question. And one thing that we learned last night, the speaker had been a CEO of various companies, and and he said that for most CEOs, the contract is that they are there to serve the company, and they're absolutely there to serve the shareholder. That's in their contract. So of course, everything that they're compensated and incentivized to do has to do with serving that shareholder. And of course, there are all these other stakeholders that are interested in that effort as well. And that's a major disconnect. And that came up with around the conversation of what did the speaker think about us moving from a quarterly earnings to a biannual quarterly or earnings setup. And he said it's not going to solve the problem, might even make it worse. Anyway, I think that's a really important thing to understand too in the mix of all this here. There's some really divided interest here at work that I think need to be addressed at some point.
And I think both divided interest and divided perspective. I talk in my book about a meeting where I was with a group of women CEOs.
I love that conversation. Yes.
And the what was so interesting was, so we were going around the table and giving this one CEO our advice or input about her concern that nobody seemed to work as hard as she did as she was building her company.
Yeah.
And she didn't understand why they didn't put in the hours, etc. And I just was really struck by how obsessed it felt she was with people's butts being in their seats.
Right.
And so when it came to my turn, I said, I guess it depends on what you want. Do you want to be the manager of these people, or do you want to lead these people? And it seems to me, as the leader of the company, you want to lead them. And so if they understand where you're headed and how they benefit, it was a small company, so they would benefit from success of the company, and you have clearly articulated where you're all headed, then why does it matter how long and how much time their butts are in their seats? And it was this moment of, for me, it was actually a revelation of we say we have leaders, and they're really just managers.
Right.
With leader titles.
Right. I completely agree. And I want to dive more into that, but let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Tamra Ryan, a nationally recognized speaker, author, and leadership expert who is redefining what it means to lead with purpose and compassion through the concept of followership. We've been talking about some of why this is an important topic to talk about in today's times. After the break, we're going to get into what are the essential characteristics of a strong leader. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive, are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of my latest came out called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it in many ways to situate what Tamra is also out to do, and that is to help leaders understand today's very diverse and discerning workforce and what do they want from you as a leader and an opportunity and an employment experience. And then I provide you 22 best practices to equip you to provide that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or at my personal site, alisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Tamra Ryan. She's the author of Followership, 16 Lessons to Become a Leader Worth Following. So that last bit we were talking about before the break there about are you a manager or a leader? And I want to situate that for our leaders because I think it's really, really important for our listeners to discern this because those two words get conflated all the time, manager and leader, and they're distinctively different, of course, as you and I align. And so to call that out, when this person you were helping to counsel, she was wanting to tell people how to do their work. That's what a manager does. A leader, to your earlier point, creates and situates a compelling vision for people to get to, and they autonomously find the best way to get there with support, of course, and along the way. And I think it's really critical that what you just said, because I have a client here in Dallas that has about 100 people, and their leader, the president, is absolutely leading this company as a manager. Everything goes through this person. So that's important to distinguish.
I think it's important to distinguish, and I think it's not an uncommon gap for people to have. And you think about how our careers progress. You start as an individual contributor, and often you're hired for your knowledge.
Right.
And as we have moved to a knowledge world. So you're hired for your knowledge, and then you do a good job, and then maybe you work with a couple other people, and so you're kind of a collaborative contributor. And as you keep moving up, you become responsible for more and more people's work. That is very different than being made a leader, but that's a natural progression for people as they continue to move up in their career. And nobody really teaches you, okay, I am no longer overseeing work. I'm actually responsible. And how I think about it is a manager sort of looks down and out. In other words, they're looking across the people who are doing the work and the work that's being done and the work product that's being created. A leader needs to look up and out. The leader is focused on the horizon and where the group is going. And again, as you said, creating an environment and hiring the right people who can figure out how to get there. The leader is responsible for the what. The team is responsible for the how. And I think, well, first of all, I don't think anybody teaches you that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over time you either learn it or you fail.
Yeah.
Or you become the leader of a company who's really a manager.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just so critical to call out. Now, let's contrast that. This is such an interesting concept you had in your book when you were talking about discerning what really makes for a strong, effective leader. And you said that you started asking people the question, who in your career has so inspired you that you would crawl through broken glass to follow them? And you found that people would answer in one of two varieties. What were they?
Well, what would happen was that either someone got sort of either a concerned look on their face, like, should I have had somebody like that?
Does that actually happen?
Yeah. Or they would get this kind of glowy look. The interesting thing was if they had someone like that, they knew immediately who it was. There was no question. They didn't have to think for a while. So they got this really sort of glowy, proud look. And then they just begin to describe what it was about that person that was so special. But I thought it was interesting, and I didn't expect this at all, but I thought it was interesting. You either didn't ever have anybody like that, or you absolutely had someone, but I didn't really talk to anybody who had more than one person,
Mm-hmm.
which I also think is a bit of a statement about the state of leadership. Um, God, wouldn't it be amazing if, as we come up in our careers, if over and over and over again we had leaders like that? But no one I've spoken with has ever had that.
Yeah, and I did once upon a time, and that was it was really my first boss, and so I can appreciate that. And so, of course, the answer, ladies and gentlemen listening, when we talk about what makes for a strong, effective leader, are these 16 qualities that Tamra wrote about, which we're going to try to hit at least a few of them as we go. But I wanted to situate that because how many of you have had a leader that you would crawl through glass for? I mean, gosh, so I want to talk about this notion that you put in your book that I really feel like is important to discuss, especially for the female audience members here, and that's this idea of being kind versus nice. Can you distinguish those terms for us?
Yeah, so I can't tell you how many times as I've been out in the community in situations where there are younger women who are earlier in their careers who maybe move up into a position and they worry about whether or not they're liked. They spend a lot of time worrying
Yeah.
about whether or not they're liked. And the word nice comes up a lot. I just want to be nice. And I really think what gets lost is nice is about you. It's
Mhm.
your worry that you're not that you're being perceived as too harsh or uh, a bitch. This is all about your worry about how you're being perceived.
Yeah.
Kind is about the other person.
Mm.
And I think that when you make that transition and you begin to realize that and Brene Brown says this very concisely, clear is kind. Um, and when you think about when we are worried about being nice, we beat around the bush, we try to say it and we couch and we do you know, give you a compliment, say what you really need to say that might be kind of harsh, and then give another compliment. And the person walks away from the conversation not really understanding what the message was. Clear is kind. Nice is when you're worried about how you're being perceived.
I think that's a very powerful distinguish there. It's always delightful when I see authors that put forth what and play with language, and the way that you do that is gorgeous. And especially, I gravitated to your word ambition. Let's talk about, and that's really speaks to what we said before. It's not about you. So, what's ambition?
Well, I think it's a term that's been around a little bit, and I'm kind of shocked that it hasn't gotten more attention
It's not
because
yours. I thought it was
yes,
yours.
it's the reason it resonated with me is that the reality is, in order to be willing to lead an organization or a division or to lead in general, you have to have a certain amount of ego to be able to do that.
Mm.
And yet, at the same time, you always have to be balancing that with the fact that it's not about you, and bring the humility to the role to understand that my job is as the leader is to bring people with me. It is not to be the hero or the savior of this project or this organization. And uh, I think often in a leadership role, one of the challenges is that you often have to have the ability to entertain two opposing ideas at the same time. That and be comfortable enough in that cognitive dissonance to be able to do your work and to lead the team. And to me, that's what ambition is. It is this idea that you need to be a strong leader. You need to have enough sense of yourself and ego to be able to lead, while at the same time recognizing that the moment you begin to think it's actually about you, uh, everybody's in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you go on to say that leaders that embrace this idea that they give space for the follower to become the most confident version of themselves while modeling what striving to become better looks like. And I think that's really important for me as somebody who teaches inspirational leadership. And really the idea that part of a leader's job is to help people realize their greatness. Well, how do you do that? If you model what better looks like and you are encouraging them to develop their sense of self and their confidence, you can help them get there.
Yes, and I think that it's also too often when someone is struggling, we have a tendency to want to save them. And when you've saved someone from themselves, you really haven't helped them learn. Um,
Right.
I talk about in the book how often I would have a conversation with myself before going into a challenging meeting, or a meeting where someone perhaps uh, wasn't performing well, and I would ask myself, "Am I committed to this person's success?"
Yeah.
Because if I am committed to their success, how I show up to that meeting is going to look very different. And also defining in my mind what success looks like, because th- that's what I need to communicate. If I'm committed to your success and I'm clear on what success looks like, then I can coach you to get closer to that. And I think too often we have an expectation of people, and we don't necessarily clearly communicate it. And we say it in more general terms, like, I just need you to do your job.
Right.
And so maybe I have an idea of what do your job looks like, and maybe the person I'm saying this to has an idea of what do your job looks like. But if you've never had that conversation about what your expectations are and what do your job does look like, then why would you expect to be successful?
Hmm. Yeah, that there's so much value in learning to communicate clearly and also helping support people when they need it. Let's grab our last break here. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Tamra Ryan, a nationally recognized speaker, author, and leadership expert who is redefining what it means to lead with purpose and compassion through her concept of fellowship. We've been talking about some of the nuances of really being an effective leader today. We're going to continue the conversation after the break. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As you know by now, this program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. If you want to learn more about how we can work together and learn about the Gusto Now Academy for leaders and individuals on various journeys alike, make your way to gusto-now.com and then navigate to the training tab and you'll find it there. If you are just now joining us, my guest is the author of Followership, 16 Authors to Become a Leader Worth Following. That's Tamra Ryan. So Tamara, one of the things I want to get into next, there's a couple pieces, several of the lessons that are really especially poignant for me, but I want to talk about one of them next, and that is the idea that your word is your bond, how critical this is. And especially you say that a leader worth following holds themselves to a higher standard for their accountability than they do others.
Well, I think that this is one that probably almost anyone in our country today could look around and say that we're disappointed with our leaders because they don't espouse this view.
Yeah.
Um, I think that this idea of understanding both the weight of your words,
Yeah.
that when you're in a leadership role and people begin to have respect for you in that role, they're paying attention to everything that you say.
Yes.
And I think that depending on the type of person we are, and I'm an ideator, so I like to say, I wonder if such and such might work, or I might if I don't watch myself, I might say something that's sort of a throwaway thing, or I might try on an opinion for size, just like, do I, say something and then wonder, do I really believe that? And what I've learned over time is that, first of all, everyone is paying attention to your words, and if you're not careful enough, they will take your words and run with them,
Mhm.
both in good ways and bad ways. And so I would preface it by saying that's the first part of that lesson. The second is that when you say you're going to do something, because your words carry so much weight, people are going to take you for your word.
Yeah.
And then they're going to pay attention to whether or not you did what you said you were going to do. And that could be things as simple as, I'm going to talk to Joe about this situation, and then getting busy or wanting to avoid conflict and not actually having the conversation with Joe. That you might not think as a leader that's that big of a deal. Like, oh, I'll get to it eventually. The person you've made that commitment to thinks it's a big deal. And I think we forget that people are paying close attention to what we say and close attention to what we say we will do. And we don't think of our word as being things that we say as being a commitment often enough. And we're
Mhm.
surrounded, I think, by people in really every sector who don't see their word as their bond.
Completely agree. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you to talk about this specific lesson. And one thing I would say, listeners and viewers, is in my work with leaders, what I have discovered the same thing that Tamara's talking about over and over again. People are saying we don't trust the leader because they don't follow through with what they said they're going to do. And I think it's oftentimes as simple as not having a system to capture what you said you were going to do. Right? You said you were going to have a conversation with Joe, but you completely slipped your mind as you ran to the next meeting. And I think that part of the opportunity here is just to simply find a way to really, really hold yourself accountable by capturing for yourself what you said you were going to do.
Well, it's funny you say that, and I just flashed to any number of one-on-one conversations I would have with my direct reports. And in that conversation, often what would come out of it is, um, I would say something like, well, let me look into that file and see if I can find that history, or let me find and so's phone number so that you can call them, whatever, very simple things. But I would never say it and not write it down.
Yeah.
So I would sit in that meeting and, of course, I would go into all of those one-on-ones prepared for the topics that I wanted to discuss and check in on. But I would never walk out of that meeting without having written that down on the list of things that I had to do. And I think something as simple as that
Right.
keeps you accountable. I also think sometimes we miss the fact, as leaders, we miss the fact that we hold, and you talked about this before the break, that we hold everyone accountable, but are we holding ourselves accountable?
Yeah.
I believe we need to hold ourselves accountable even to a higher standard. But I think too often we're so focused on holding everyone else accountable, we haven't given a lot of thought to how we're holding ourselves accountable in the same or even a more rigorous way.
Yeah. Agreed. Such an opportunity. Some of that is just self-awareness and having a system to be able to do that. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier that I definitely wanted to talk about when you were talking about the example of, I'll circle back with Joe, is you said something about, maybe you're running from conflict or afraid of conflict. And I think this is a critical one. This is one of your lessons here, not to run away from conflict. So let's talk about that one.
Well, I mean,
She
who like
smiles when I say that.
nobody
Yeah, right,
nobody likes conflict. I mean,
right.
and yet at the same time, and conflict, I think, in our minds, that is multiple levels. It can be something as simple as you, that you need to have a tough conversation with someone that's going to be a message that's really hard to deliver. I mean, that's one version of that. And I agree. It is way more way easier from a mental anguish standpoint to avoid having hard conversations,
Hmm.
and to ignore the subtle cues that there's something going on. But I guarantee that if things not addressed will blow up.
Yeah.
And and blow up might not be a big dramatic thing, but you will lose good team members. You will lose credibility. You will lose profitability. Uh, and so being willing to have the hard conversations and being willing to address conflict in a productive, non-confrontational way is probably one of the most important skills anyone as a leader can learn. Um, I- and I think that often what happens is that it's never as bad as we imagine it to be. It's the avoidance of it that makes it seem bigger. I also, in the book, I talk about a situation that occurred where I knew, and it was a huge conflict with multiple team members, and I knew in that situation I was not equipped to address
Yeah.
it, but I didn't want to avoid it. There was no scenario in which avoiding addressing it was a good solution. So in that situation, I actually brought someone in to help with it. So I guess I don't want to come across as saying that a leader must always know how to handle the conflict, because I don't think that that's realistic. I think we all bring our own baggage to our work situations, and when you put a group of people together, sometimes it conflates into something much bigger than you as a leader can handle. The key is recognizing when it's your role to address it, and when perhaps you need to get some help to address it. But the whole point of it is not addressing it's not a choice.
Right, right. And just quickly on that, there's so much we could say about this, but even just understanding how you relate to conflict yourself. Thomas Kilmann's 5 styles can help you with that. And when you start looking at what's the source of the conflict, is this about values? Is this about the process of work that we're trying to accomplish here? Is this about power or status? Is it about the relationship? That just really helps to start to make the conversation much more productive right out of the gate.
Well, exactly. And I do talk about that in the book of really, um, a lot of the book is about knowing thyself, with this
Yes.
theory being that when you know yourself, you can show up as a better leader, but also really getting more in tune with the people who you work with so that you really understand the perspective they bring to to conflict, to work, um, to success. At Women's Bean Project, I worked in an environment where there were many people who were more afraid of success than failure
Hmm.
because failure was familiar. Success began to create discomfort because it said things like, well, they're going to hold me to a higher standard now. Um, when I failed, everybody knew, to expect that of me. And so even understanding that of the people I worked with was super helpful in terms of how I could work with them, and how I could better frame their behavior.
Hmm. Yes, and now in many ways, what you've been just discussing there really does speak to and smacks of emotional intelligence, which you really can't go a day without hearing that phrase. However, what I would say is that many people really don't understand what that entails. One, they don't understand that if you look at the Goldman model, the 4 aspects of it. But part of what you also talk about is how important it is for leaders to understand and correctly label their own feelings before they can even be adept at helping others connect with their own.
Yeah, I talk in the book about, and this was part of a personal evolution for me, but um, this happens to us all the time, and I think your listeners will be able to relate. Things happen around us, and we have responses. We have emotional responses. I think that's not uncommon. What is uncommon, though, is taking a step back and saying, gosh, why did I why does that make me so mad? What is that situation reminding me of, or what is that bringing up for me? And
Mhm.
taking that next step to really understand why you have that emotional response before you react or act is probably one of the most important skills relative to emotional intelligence that I've learned personally. And just getting in touch with, holy cow, that really kind of ticked me off. What's going on for me? Not, we have a tendency, I think, as humans to say, you really made me mad, instead of saying, huh, that really actually kind of made me mad. I wonder what's going on for me, what does that trigger for me? And that isn't about being all up in our feelings. It's really having the self-awareness of understanding why we behave or react in a way to the external environment. Because most of the time, it's sort of bringing our middle school selves to our adult lives, which is, in middle school, you think everybody's looking at your stupid haircut or your pants that your mom made you wear or whatever. And really, as we get older, what we should begin to realize is the fact of the matter is most people aren't thinking about us at all
Right, right,
most of the time. And
right.
they're doing things not to make you mad or to make you upset. They're doing things because of their own reasons why they do things. And in the same way that we need to understand why we're responding in the way that we are. It's not being done to us. It is being done, and we're having feelings about it.
Yeah, and to bring this point home, I'm sure many of the listeners and viewers are like, yeah, yeah, I got all that. I know all that. Makes complete sense. And then let's just throw some numbers at you, ladies and gentlemen. You quote an organizational psychologist, Tasha Urich, in your book, and who says that 95% of people believe they are self-aware, 95%, but only 10 to 15% actually fit the criteria of being self-aware. I think this is really important, right? We're not nearly as with it as we think we are.
Well, yes, and that goes back to the ego part, right? So the one question I would ask is the 95% comes from the ambition, and
Right.
and the 10 to 15% really comes when humility actually ends up being combined with that. I I I thought that was fascinating because if you think about that and how that's showing up as leaders walking around and their companies, 95% thinking they've got it going on, and really only 10 to 15% actually do. No wonder people are quitting their jobs or
Right.
not inspired by their leaders or not trusting their leaders.
Right. Right. Oh, so important. I'm so glad that you're on this next venture of your life. I'm so grateful that I got to read your book. As I said to you, I'm completely aligned with this. So much of this is what I've been trying to teach as well. So now we're locking arms. We're doing this together. The show's listened by people around the world who are trying to develop their leadership. They're trying to find companies that will help them realize their greatness. What would you like to leave them with today?
Well, I think that when we think about leadership as a journey, not a destination, then that opens us up to a continuous improvement. And that we will never entirely be there. But gosh, how fulfilling to wake up every day and try. And so, I invite people to read the book. It's available it can be ordered at any bookstore. It's also available on Amazon, and it's also available in the Kindle version. Um, but really think of this, your as leadership as your journey is what I'd like to leave with, is that it really isn't a destination. There's not a day, I think, that you wake up and say, oh, I got it. Instead, there are always new things to learn.
Completely agree, which is why I continue to champion lifelong learning. Tamra, it's a delight to know you. Thanks for coming back on to Working at Purpose.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Alise.
Listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more about Tamra Ryan, her book Followership, and the work that she's doing to elevate leaders. Visit her website, tamraryan.com. Let me spell that for you. Tamra is Tamra, Ryan, Ryan, tamraryan.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Elizabeth Weingarten talking about her new book, How to Fall in Love with Questions, a new way to thrive in times of uncertainty. We talked about how to use questions to help us when we feel stuck, powerless, or drained, and unlock self-discovery to help us feel fully alive while working through uncertainty. Next week, we'll be on the air with Wes Adams talking about his book, Meaningful Work, How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. See you then, and together, let's lean in and learn how to make workplaces work for everyone and find ways to do business in a way that betters the world. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.